Most people think diabetes is only about sugar and lifestyle, but the data tells a different story.
In countries like the United States, diabetes has become a silent epidemic, affecting more than 38 million people and growing every year. Entire families are consumed by it. Generations pass down not only genetics, but prescriptions, insulin injections, and the idea that there is no escape. But then you look at isolated communities in rural Japan, villages where modern fast food has not fully replaced traditional diets, where herbs and ancient remedies are still a quiet part of daily life, and the statistics tell a different story. Rates of diabetes are dramatically lower. Even among those who carry the same genetic risk factors, the disease appears less aggressive. For decades, scientists shrugged this off, attributing it to diet, lifestyle, or cultural differences. But if that were the whole truth, why do other Asian populations with similar diets still suffer from the same surge in diabetes as the West? Something about these Japanese communities didn't fit the model. The missing piece may lie in what they've been consuming, not just rice, fish, and vegetables, but specific compounds long valued for their medicinal properties. Compounds with one very peculiar trait: potent anti-parasitic effects. In fact, some of the herbs traditionally consumed in these regions were once prescribed to expel microscopic invaders from the body. For centuries, before antibiotics, before synthetic drugs, these natural remedies formed the first line of defense against hidden infections. And now, researchers who dared to connect the dots noticed something chilling. The very same herbs appeared to help regulate blood sugar in ways modern pharmaceuticals could not explain. Could it be that these ancient practices were not simply folk medicine, but a subtle, unrecognized defense against the parasitic trigger hiding in plain sight? Reports exist, though buried deep in obscure publications, that link specific plant compounds to the disruption of parasitic activity within the pancreas. One experiment in a Japanese lab showed how an extract from a common herb weakened microscopic organisms that had invaded pancreatic cells, restoring partial insulin function in animal models. The study never made headlines. No follow-up trials were funded. And yet the data was there. Why would such findings be ignored? The answer may be uncomfortable, but it is also obvious. There is no profit in a cure that comes from a plant anyone can grow. There is no billion-dollar market for an herb that can be harvested without patents or factories, and there is no incentive for a system built on recurring prescriptions to pursue a solution that could disrupt its foundation. This is not conspiracy, it is economics. History shows us that medical discoveries threatening entrenched industries are often silenced. Look back at the early days of antibiotics, when competing chemical companies fought to suppress penicillin, or at the researchers who first linked smoking to lung cancer, ridiculed and discredited until the evidence became undeniable. The same pattern repeats. When evidence surfaces that challenges profit, the evidence disappears. But despite suppression, whispers continue. Travelers who visit these Japanese communities quietly return with stories of strange improvements. Families who import certain herbal extracts share their experiences in private forums. Independent doctors publish reports labeled inconclusive, but when read carefully, they all point to the same hidden mechanism: a biological invader silently sabotaging the pancreas. And here is the most disturbing part. The more you examine the data, the clearer the pattern becomes. In regions where anti-parasitic herbs are a regular part of life, diabetes rates remain mysteriously lower. In regions without them, the disease spreads unchecked, feeding an industry worth billions. Coincidence or cover-up? The medical establishment would have you believe it's coincidence. But how many coincidences must pile up before the story collapses under its own weight? We now face a question most are too afraid to ask. Is it possible that diabetes, long considered purely metabolic, has an infectious component the world refuses to admit? Stay with me, because in the next part we'll uncover how suppressed reports, ignored data, and buried accounts from inside the system reveal just how far the fortress of profit will go to protect itself. What happens when a discovery threatens to shake the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar industry? In the north of Italy, hidden in a modest medical facility, a group of doctors stumbled into exactly that kind of discovery. It began as a routine examination of patients whose diabetes seemed strangely resistant to conventional treatment. Blood sugar fluctuated wildly. Symptoms worsened despite medication. Nothing in the standard playbook explained why. What if the true cause of diabetes was never just about sugar, diet, or genetics, but something far more disturbing? Something alive, hidden deep inside your own body? For decades, we've been told the same story. Diabetes is the result of poor eating habits, obesity, lack of exercise, or an unlucky genetic lottery. Doctors repeat it. The media amplifies it. Pharmaceutical companies profit from it. But what if that story was incomplete? Behind the official explanations, there are fragments of research, ignored studies, whispers from independent scientists, and anomalies in patient data that suggest something darker. Something that connects diabetes not to lifestyle alone, but to a hidden biological invader. It sounds absurd at first. How could parasites, tiny organisms usually associated with contaminated water or third-world diseases, have anything to do with one of the most common health crises in the United States? And yet, the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to dismiss. Back in 2019, a small team of Italian doctors stumbled across something they weren't supposed to find. They weren't searching for a cure. They weren't running clinical trials for pharmaceutical giants. They were simply observing tissue samples from diabetic patients. What they saw should have been impossible. Clusters of microscopic organisms, parasites, not in the gut, where they are usually found, but in the pancreas itself, the very organ that produces insulin, the very command center of blood sugar regulation. At first, they thought it had to be contamination, a mistake in the lab. But repetition after repetition brought the same result. Strange worm-like organisms attaching themselves to pancreatic tissue, disrupting its function and leaving behind inflammation that mirrored the progression of type 2 diabetes. The discovery shook the researchers. They reviewed medical archives, searching for any reference to such findings. And what they found buried in forgotten journals from decades ago left them speechless. As far back as the 1970s, there had been obscure mentions of unidentified microorganisms in the pancreas of patients with diabetes. But those mentions were always dismissed, labeled as artifacts of poor lab technique. Coincidence or deliberate neglect? The question becomes unavoidable. If parasites can silently infiltrate the pancreas, interfering with insulin production, could they be one of the hidden triggers fueling the diabetes epidemic? Mainstream medicine doesn't want to ask that question, because the answer could unravel billions of dollars in revenue. Imagine if a microscopic organism, not your lifestyle alone, was partly responsible for your condition. That would mean prevention, treatment, and even reversal might not lie in endless prescriptions, but in addressing the parasite itself. And yet, strangely, this line of inquiry keeps vanishing. Reports disappear from front pages. Studies remain locked in academic databases few ever read. And any researcher daring to suggest a parasitic link risks ridicule or worse, silence. Why? Because diabetes is one of the most profitable conditions in the world. Billions flow every year into treatments, insulin, monitoring devices, hospital visits. A condition labeled incurable is a perfect business model. A condition with a root cause that can be disrupted? That's a nightmare for the industry. But here's what most people don't realize. In specific regions of Japan, where traditional medicine still plays a role, local doctors had quietly observed unusual resistance to diabetes in communities regularly exposed to certain herbal compounds. Herbs known not just for balancing blood sugar, but for their anti-parasitic properties. Coincidence again? Or was there a connection nobody wanted to admit? One Italian doctor who dared to present his findings at a small medical conference was met not with curiosity, but with silence. Later, his work was discredited, not with evidence, but with dismissal. The phrase used was statistical anomaly. But anomalies, when repeated enough, form a pattern, and this pattern was becoming harder to ignore. So the question we must ask is this: if there really is a hidden parasitic link to diabetes, why hasn't the world been told? Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more disturbing this connection becomes. And once you uncover the hidden reports and the buried accounts of patients who dared to speak out, you will never see diabetes the same way again. Why do some cultures remain strangely resistant to the diabetes epidemic, while others collapse under its weight? On the surface, the numbers don't add up. So the team decided to look deeper. They began taking tissue samples, not just of the pancreas, but of surrounding areas, searching for anomalies. And what they found raised more questions than answers. Tiny clusters, microscopic invaders appeared in sample after sample. At first dismissed as lab contamination, the phenomenon proved too consistent, too precise. The organisms attached themselves to insulin-producing cells, leaving behind scars of inflammation. The very same inflammation that accelerates type 2 diabetes. The discovery should have been groundbreaking. But when the doctors attempted to publish their findings, resistance appeared immediately. Their work was flagged as methodologically flawed. Peer reviewers labeled it speculative. Colleagues warned them to step back to avoid career suicide. Think about that. When scientists uncover a pattern that could change the trajectory of a global health crisis, the system's response is not curiosity, it is suppression. Why? Because the implications were devastating for the established order. If parasites could disrupt pancreatic function, then treatment could not remain limited to blood sugar management. It would require targeting the root cause. And if natural compounds with anti-parasitic properties showed promise, then the billion-dollar market for drugs and insulin was at risk. The Italian team didn't stop there. Quietly, they began comparing their results with obscure international reports. They found references from Asia, from South America, even from North Africa, all hinting at the same disturbing possibility. The evidence was scattered, but the picture was clear. And yet, none of it reached the public. Medical journals buried the reports in obscure sections. Funding agencies declined follow-up studies. Researchers who pressed further faced ridicule or worse, silence. This is where the metaphor of the fortress becomes impossible to ignore. Imagine a vast, impenetrable structure built not of stone but of financial interests. Every brick represents a recurring prescription, an insulin refill, a device for monitoring blood sugar. The walls are guarded by pharmaceutical giants, insurance companies, and even academic institutions whose survival depends on the continuation of the status quo. Inside this fortress, diabetes is not a disease to be cured, it is an asset to be managed. And any discovery that threatens to weaken those walls is treated as an enemy. The Italian doctors, realizing the weight of what they had uncovered, found themselves in a dangerous position. Some retreated, choosing silence over professional exile. Others attempted to speak, but their voices were drowned in a sea of official denials. Their findings were labeled statistical noise, and the fortress stood tall. But here is the truth: every fortress has cracks. Every wall, no matter how strong, eventually weakens when exposed to enough pressure. And these suppressed findings, combined with whispers from around the world, form cracks that are only widening. What if those cracks grow large enough to expose what lies inside? What if the world begins to see that diabetes is not just a chronic condition to be endlessly medicated, but a biological attack with a potential solution, deliberately ignored? History has shown us that great shifts often begin in small, hidden places. A quiet lab, a forgotten village, a handful of doctors who refuse to look away. The fortress of profit may stand tall, but outside its walls a different story is already being written. A story that does not end with lifelong prescriptions, but with the possibility of freedom. And that story, though buried, continues to surface, in suppressed reports, in overlooked data, and in the buried accounts of those who dared to question the official narrative. Stay with me, because in the next part, we will shine a light on the hidden testimonies and the silenced voices that reveal just how deep this suppression goes, and why the truth, once uncovered, cannot be contained forever. What if an entire industry was built not on curing disease, but on ensuring you never escape it? To understand why the truth about parasites and diabetes remains hidden, you must follow the money. Diabetes is not just a medical condition, it is one of the most profitable markets in the world. Every year, billions of dollars are spent on insulin alone. Add to that the cost of glucose monitors, test strips, emergency hospital visits, and endless prescriptions for related complications, blood pressure drugs, cholesterol medications, treatments for nerve pain, vision problems, kidney disease. Diabetes is not a single market. It is a web of markets, all interconnected, feeding off the same silent epidemic. Now ask yourself, what happens if even part of that web collapses? What happens if the root cause of the disease can be addressed? If patients begin to free themselves from the cycle of dependency? The answer is simple. The fortress of profit crumbles. This is why discoveries like the one in Italy never make it past the gatekeepers. Because the gatekeepers are not doctors in white coats, but corporations in boardrooms. They do not measure success in lives saved, but in quarterly profits. And here's the chilling part. The system is designed to make you believe this is normal. Doctors are trained to manage diabetes, not to eliminate it. Medical schools often rely on funding from pharmaceutical companies that thrive on chronic illness. Even research grants are tied to studies that reinforce the same cycle, medications that control symptoms without ever daring to touch the cause. When a new drug is developed, the goal is not to replace insulin or remove the need for prescriptions. The goal is to add another layer of dependency, another recurring revenue stream. And if a discovery threatens that model, it is quietly buried, ridiculed, or ignored. History repeats itself. Think of the tobacco industry, which silenced evidence linking cigarettes to cancer for decades. Think of asbestos, once considered safe until whistleblowers exposed the deadly truth. And now think of diabetes, a condition so deeply woven into the fabric of profit that questioning its narrative is treated as heresy. The fortress doesn't just defend itself with money. It defends itself with perception. Every time you hear the words lifelong management, you are hearing the voice of the fortress. Every time someone tells you there is no cure, you're hearing a narrative crafted not from evidence, but from fear of disruption. Yet behind this fortress, cracks continue to spread. Reports resurface in obscure journals. Independent doctors risk their reputations to publish strange findings. Families whisper of improvements after using compounds no pharmaceutical company can patent. And ordinary people, tired of being told their fate is sealed, begin to search for answers outside the fortress walls. But the system is ruthless. If you step outside its narrative, you are labeled reckless, irresponsible, or misinformed. If a doctor dares to speak, their funding disappears. Their careers stall. Sometimes their licenses are threatened. This is how control is maintained, not through proof, but through fear. So ask yourself, if a discovery existed that could weaken this entire fortress, would you ever hear about it on the evening news? Would you see it promoted in glossy medical magazines backed by billion-dollar ad campaigns? Or would it be buried, hidden in the shadows, waiting for those bold enough to uncover it? The answer is already clear, because every suppressed study, every silenced voice, every ignored anomaly points to the same uncomfortable truth. The system doesn't want you free. It wants you dependent, and yet freedom has never been closer. Because despite the fortress, despite the suppression, despite the fear, the evidence still leaks out. Through forgotten archives, through overlooked experiments, through the buried accounts of those who dared to question the narrative. Stay with me, because in the next part we'll pull back the curtain on those buried accounts. Real voices scattered across forums, reports, and conversations that all whisper the same disturbing truth. A truth the fortress cannot silence forever. How many whispers does it take before coincidence begins to sound like truth? Not all evidence comes from labs or medical journals. Some of the most telling clues appear in unexpected places, anonymous posts buried in forgotten forums, personal notes tucked into obscure publications, and fragments of conversations never meant to see the light of day. While the fortress works to silence official studies, ordinary people continue to share what they've experienced. And when you place those stories side by side, patterns begin to emerge. One account came from a man in his late 60s living in Florida. After 3 decades of relying on insulin, he confessed in an online forum that he had reached a breaking point. Through word of mouth, he learned about herbal compounds long used in Asia for their anti-parasitic properties. Skeptical but desperate, he tried them. Weeks later, his post took a different tone. His blood sugar readings were steadier. His dependence on insulin lessened. He wrote, "For the first time in 30 years, I feel like something inside me is changing." Another story surfaced from Texas, written by a mother of 2. She described relentless fatigue, constant thirst, and sleepless nights, all the familiar symptoms of diabetes. Then, after introducing a certain blend of herbs into her daily routine, she claimed something shifted. Her nights grew quieter. Her blood sugar stabilized. She admitted it wasn't a miracle cure, but her words carried weight. It's not about perfection. It's about finally feeling like myself again. These voices, scattered and unpolished, might seem isolated, but the deeper you dig, the more of them you find. From online communities in Canada, from translated reports in Germany, from private chat rooms in Italy. People who had never met, speaking different languages, yet describing nearly identical experiences. Strange improvements, stabilized blood sugar, a sense of hope where medicine had told them none existed. Of course, critics are quick to dismiss these accounts as anecdotal. But history reminds us almost every medical breakthrough began with anecdotes. The discovery of penicillin, a contaminated petri dish. The link between bacteria and ulcers, patient testimonies ignored for years. Anecdotes may not be clinical trials, but when enough of them align, they form the outline of a truth science is too slow or too unwilling to acknowledge. And that's what makes these accounts dangerous. Not because they lack impact, but because they have too much. Because if ordinary people begin to connect these dots on their own, the fortress begins to lose its grip. It is no coincidence that these testimonies remain hidden in the corners of the internet. Algorithms bury them. Medical authorities dismiss them. Pharmaceutical interests ensure they never reach the mainstream, but they exist. And like cracks in a wall, they multiply quietly, spreading until the structure can no longer contain them. Think about it. If hundreds of people across different countries with different lifestyles report similar improvements from compounds known to disrupt parasites, can it really all be coincidence? Or are we staring at the early signs of a suppressed truth? The fortress tells you these are illusions, wishful thinking, or the result of chance. But the voices keep coming. Anonymous, faceless, but united by the same experience. Something hidden, something ignored, is at play inside the body. And perhaps that is why the system fears them. Because whispers cannot be sued. Anonymous posts cannot be silenced in court. And buried reports once uncovered can never truly be erased. Stay with me, because in the next part, we will connect these hidden voices to the suppressed data itself, pulling together the final threads of this investigation. And once you see the full picture, the truth will no longer be deniable. What if everything we've uncovered here is only a fragment of a much larger secret? Throughout this investigation, you've seen how strange anomalies, forgotten studies, suppressed reports, and buried accounts all point in one direction: the possibility that parasites, hidden deep within the pancreas, are fueling the diabetes epidemic. We've seen how communities with ancient anti-parasitic traditions remain mysteriously resistant to the disease. We've seen how Italian doctors uncovered evidence that should have changed everything, only to be silenced. We've seen how the fortress of profit, built on recurring prescriptions, defends itself not with cures, but with control. And we've seen how scattered voices, ordinary people speaking in whispers, are all telling the same story. Individually, these might be coincidences, but together they form a pattern too powerful to ignore. And yet, what we've covered here is not the full story. There is something more. Something we cannot show openly in this video, because beyond the fortress walls lies the revelation of a compound, a natural formula whispered about in suppressed reports and hidden testimonies, a discovery with the potential to disrupt the cycle of dependence that billions of dollars depend on. That revelation exists. It has been documented, it has been silenced, and now you have the chance to see it for yourself. The link is in the description below. It leads to a private, hidden video, one that reveals what the industry fears the most. A video that shows how this compound works, why it has been kept in the shadows, and why those who encounter it never see diabetes the same way again. But I must warn you, just like the reports we uncovered, this hidden video may not remain online for long. The more it spreads, the more likely it is to vanish. If you are seeing this now, consider it a rare opportunity. So here is what to do. Subscribe to this channel right now and activate the notification bell. This is the only way to make sure you see every new piece of the puzzle as we uncover it. Share this video with someone who deserves to know the truth. And most importantly, click the link in the description. Watch the hidden video before it disappears. Because in the end, the most dangerous secret is not what the industry hides from you. It's the possibility that freedom has always been closer than you were told. The hidden video's waiting. Click the link, see the revelation for yourself. And once you do, you will never see diabetes or the system behind it the same way again.